This is Dan Schneider. On this Dan Schneider video interview, the subject is belly dancing. I have 3 belly dancers, and we're going to be talking about the history of the art form. The subject is belly dancing, and I have 3 women who are belly dancers. We'll talk about their lives, their art form, and the history of the art form. On the upper left, I have, let me see now, because I have this Sakura. That's how you pronounce your dancing?
Yes.
Do you want to give your real name, or do you want to use just
Sakura?
Sakura is your real name?
Yeah.
Okay. And it's Sakura Raybuck, right?
Yes.
Because I wanted to ask. So let's give me a little bit of background about yourself in terms of how you got into belly dancing and your youth and drawn to it.
I started in 1977, so 45 years ago. And I had seen a friend of mine's mom who was in a dance troupe in Seattle. And I saw her and thought that it was absolutely amazing that she didn't have any bones in her arms. And I wanted to learn that. So I was drawn ever since then.
So as a performance art form, were you more drawn to the movement and stuff rather than, and what drew you to that than, say, modern jazz dancing or
Good question.
ballet?
I actually, as a little kid, did ballet, but I chose to be in Girl Scouts instead of ballet after a fairly short period of time. And after that, my mother was not interested in my doing any kind of dance. So this is something that I took up basically from a neighbor, from my friend and her mother. So I was drawn to ballet, but I didn't want to do it as much as I wanted to do Girl Scouts. How's that?
Okay. Now below Sakura is Nisa, which is the stage name. And what is your real name?
My Muggle name is Heather Ward.
Okay. And so give a little background about your story. And
well, I decided to take a class. At the time, I was a graduate student in anthropology at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And anybody who's listening who knows that graduate school is a very stressful time in one's life. And I needed something outside of my university life to escape. And I really didn't know anything about this when I started. I was interested in different kinds of what at the time people would call world music. And so music had an attraction to me, but I didn't know anything about this dance form aside from that it was exotic. And I started looking around. This was the late 90s and the internet was there. But I found a woman who was pretty far away, and I thought I was going to have to drive to her. And she told me there was this woman outside of town, outside of Urbana. And I called this woman up, and turns out she'd been a dancer for 20 something odd years and was tucked away in this farmhouse in the cornfields outside of Urbana, Illinois. And I took my first private lesson with her, and I said, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. And here I am.
And so were you drawn to belly dance because it's an individual art form? You don't need a partner to dance like you do in some other dance forms?
Yeah, I didn't have any kind of dance background at all before I did this. I mean, besides bopping around by myself. And I was, none of my students will believe this, but a pretty introverted person. So I really just wanted something for myself that I didn't have to engage anyone with at that time. So yeah, and I was always kind of a physically awkward person too. So yeah, it fit the bill.
And my third guest, right below me, if you're watching this, is Bridget Genevieve. And I don't know Bridget personally, but I have my wife has shopped at her mother's tea store for many years, and I've seen her on occasion. Now you use Bridget Genevieve. Is that your real full name, or what is your real full name?
Actually, Genevieve is my middle name. There's actually a dancer in my area who has the same exact name as I do. So in order to kind of get around people confusing us, even though they do anyways, I'm just like, just go by Bridget Genevieve. I don't know how to spell it, but it sounds pretty.
And now,
I don't have to.
how did you get into belly dancing versus other forms of dance?
Well, it was actually very similar to Sakura. I was 12 when I first started dancing belly dance, but I first encountered it when I was 11. My mother, she used to take me to her belly dance class because she danced before me. And my job, because they would do choreography, was to press play and pause on the music little iPod thingy. And I just sat there and I would watch them. And I guess it just kind of osmosis into me. Because at some point, I was just doing belly dance as I was walking around. And Mom was just like, Bridget, what are you doing? I'm like, I don't know. I'm dancing. And then we moved up to Seattle, or the Seattle area, which is honestly a huge community for belly dance. And I really, really got into it. And I started dancing when I was 12.
So your mother was a dancer as well? Was she involved in any organizations? Is it sort of like Cub Scouts for, where you just...
No, she was. She took a class and she was really, really into it. And she was actually really good. And she did a bunch of different stuff. And I just tagged along. I have done what I've done with everything. Just been a +1 and just kind of wormed my way in and razzled dazzled.
Okay, so we know that you chose your dance name, I guess we'll call it, because of another dancer. Sakura, how did you choose the name Sakura as your dance name? And does it have any meaning to the art form?
It's actually I was named because of family friend.
That's right.
It's just a weird spelling of Sakura, Japanese cherry blossom.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so.
Because I remember when Bridget mentioned you, she had a U in your name, Sakura. So I guess that's where she got that from.
Yeah, there's no U in mine. So yeah,
okay.
Yeah, it's, what can I tell you?
and Nisa, that sounds Japanese too. Is that a Japanese name?
No, it's actually kind of an embarrassing story, because if I went back in time, I would probably just operate under my real name. But when I was coming up, it was kind of the thing that people took stage names. And to be honest, even Indigenous dancers, most of them have performance names. And so I went on this, purportedly name list on that primitive internet, and I found this word, and, Nisa, translation women in Arabic. And I thought, wow, that's very empowering. And then as years went by, I found out no Arabic speakers use this as a given name. So, and the pronunciation is different. So even when I deal with Egyptians and Arabs, I pronounce it Nisa, and to them it's as foreign a name as it is here. And so it's a made up name, essentially.
Okay. I'm sorry, what did you say?
Which is really good for a stage name. Personally, I think that a stage name is a really good idea for safety.
So before we dig into the history of the dance, a couple of other questions. I mentioned ballet, and you've got like Dancing with the Stars. They do sort of ballroom dancing and all kinds of other ethnic dances, which is a popular show for the last 12, 15 years, whatever it's been. But one of the things that's interesting in watching some videos of belly dances, you get belly dancers of all sizes and shapes, whereas a ballerina has to be kind of petite, I guess. Is that one of the things, how popular is belly dancing? Do more quote-unquote normal people do belly dancing than do ballet, Sakura?
Yes, absolutely. This is also one of the places that ballerinas go to die, kind of. It's a dance form that you can do even with body damage. And so ballerinas, their careers come to an end really early. So this is something that people can learn later. They can transition to. and it is more accepting in the general level of different body types and different appearances.
Well, I know I've known a few ballet dancers, and they get sort of like the hammer toes from always being on the end of the toe. Where I see most belly dancers are flat-footed. Is it easier on the body and the feet then?
Demi-toe is a little bit more common, but for folkloric styles, flatter foot is more common because folks do flat foot. But we don't have as much knee damage from this. Do you disagree, hon?
About, no. I was going to say about the feet, because there's definitely a lot of variability and flat ball. And I was glad you mentioned that in the general kind of classroom environment, it's very body accepting, but definitely in the professional performing level, there are commercial standards that are certainly still exclusionary. And here and there, I mean, in the cultures of origin.
Well, is
Although,
that, is that because as an outsider and as a male, I always equate belly dance with seduction, and you have to be shaking the hips and whatnot. Whereas in ballet is, in a sense, to me as an outsider, seems more abstract.
The performance, okay. So men do tend to interpret it that way, and actually we do as a general culture. But there's, I just had like 5 thoughts at one time. It's not the shaking the hips thing and everything, and it's true in cultures of origin. This isn't done by anybody that isn't pretty darn perfect looking. But in the United States, it's a different focus and a different view. And I, as a woman pushing 60, am still teaching workshops and being valued as a performer in the United States, where it would be much harder to do in cultures of origin.
So, Bridget, let me ask you, as the youngest of the trio, do you find belly dancing easier? Did you start out as a ballerina or something?
Yeah, I actually started ballet. When did I start? I was like 3.
Wow.
I started going on and off. I was never good, but I still went. And honestly, I find belly dance to be, well, there is a lot of exclusionary stuff happening. At a base level, if you just want to dance, I find it to be more inclusionary to different body types, because it is I believe, Nisa, you've studied this, it's more of a dance of the people because it's a cultural dance. Depending on what areas you're from, there's different belly dances. It's not just all the style from Cairo or the cabaret, because there's also folkloric. So it's really depending on what you do. It can be a dance done by everybody, depending on what level you want to go to.
So, we'll talk about the physical aspects of it. I know, having met you a handful of times at the store, Bridget, you have a sort of an explosive personality. You'll be calm, and then all of a sudden, boom! And that seems to me, when, again, as an outsider, you'll see a belly dancer doing a little, and then boom, it just starts. Is there a personality type? Do you find that the dance, Bridget, is very good? It mirrors your personality type?
Well, because I do a lot of restaurant dancing, you gotta have a good, really funny personality to make the money. Well, money. But I believe depending on just what music you choose, what movements and shapes you want to make, you can make different personalities. So I can be very coy and soft, or I can be like the Turkish dancers, very bam, in face, full of personality. It all depends on what you want to portray and what you want to show, like any dance, because we're not like actors or actresses. We can't go with prose and have all these huge speeches. We have to do everything by our movement and by our faces.
So Heather,
having good personality, man, gets you a lot of money. Get those tips.
So Heather, how about you? Does this dance suit your personality as well as your physical ability?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think, you know, so I mostly can speak to the belly dance within the Egyptian cultural framework, where tremendous value is placed on personal style, right? That no one should be a carbon copy of any other dancer. You should be your own dancer. So there was a famous dancer from Egypt who got really popular in the early aughts by the name of Dina. And, you know, a lot of other up and coming dancers got a lot of flack for kind of copying her style because it was so signature. So I think having that unique kind of personality is very important. I also wanted to mention, you know, just to be clear, because we're really talking about multiple belly dances, the term is thorny, right? But in Egyptian and other Arabic and other Middle Eastern, North African cultures, there's the social dance that everyone does. And then there's the stage dance that is for professional entertainers. And I think in the social environment or the casual hobby environment, it's a very open thing, but in the professional setting, it varies tremendously from context to context, what the expectations are for a performer, whether it be physicality, costuming, you know, a professional setting, even in Egyptian contexts are not monolithic. And I also want to point out that this is a gender neutral dance. And there's a long history of male performers in the dance.
Well, we'll get to that when
we're
we
talking
talk
a lot
about
about
history.
she's.
Yeah, we'll touch more of that when we talk about the history.
Sure.
Sakura, how about you? Is this more in tune, this type of dance more in tune with your personality? Can you express yourself more in this than, if you will, a ballroom dancer?
And yeah, I'm kind of more like Bridget in that I'm really quite fiery. And I like to express the range of emotions. So I'm just kind of a naturally over the top sort of person. So heavy personality, heavy entertainment. And, you know, that's a lot of technique, but I mean, really, yeah, it expresses me much better than something constrained. That's part of why I didn't like ballet, actually. I found it too rigid and choreographed, which it is. Yeah, you're supposed to be.
So something like belly dance, you feel freer to nuance parts of your own set. Like if you want to shake your right hip, but you're not reliant on another person who would say, "Oh, I didn't expect that."
Yeah, it does give you a lot more freedom. I mean, it's one of the few dances that you can do on a professional level completely improvisationally. And I find that I was originally a musician, so I find that a lot more freeing to allow you to respond at the time instead of being more rigid. And you know, I prefer the Turkish style because it tends to be a little bit more entertainment focused. And although I've studied both in Egypt and Turkey. So
well, we'll talk about the different types of styles in a bit then.
I knew you didn't want to go there yet.
So let's talk a little bit about the history of the dance form. When we talk about belly dance, some of you, I think maybe one or two of you used the plural. And I remember asking before we did the show, I asked Bridget about, is hula dancing considered a belly dance? So they are different types of things, although they have similar moves to an outsider like me, you know, with the shaking of the hips and control. No? Okay. Okay, go ahead, Sakura. Yeah.
Hula doesn't use upper body movement, doesn't use torso the same way. And you know, a lot of times people get confused with hula and flamenco and belly dance, and both flamenco and hula use a more rigid upper body, and like ballet does. And belly dancing is one of the few, well, stage belly dance is one of the few dance forms that really uses a lot of torso arching, curving movements.
Mm-hmm. Bridget, what is your take on the different types of styles and what defines a belly dance?
Well, I mean, I guess it's more of the regions it comes from. Like hula, hula's from the other side of the globe, so it can't be considered part of the same family. But for the from belly dances, they're kind of all contained in the same regions almost, in the same section of the globe for shared movement families and almost shared language, even though, as we all know, belly dance does not have a shared movement language, but we're trying. We're trying.
How about you, Heather?
To me, you can't define what this dance form is without the cultural component. This is a cultural dance. It's tied to a culture, multiple cultures really, but that's where we get into the thorniness of this terminology, belly dance, because in the English language, people use that term really liberally to umbrella a lot of things that just involve torso articulation. But if we narrow it, we're really talking about kind of a network of vaguely similar traditional dances that span from North Africa, wrapping up through the Levant into the Middle East and up into parts of Central Asia. And, in cultures where this has evolved into a stage dance, well, even at the social level, it's tied to music. It's inextricably tied to music. So Egyptian belly dance and Egyptian music are bound, and you can't learn to dance belly dance in the Egyptian way without learning to understand Egyptian music.
So how did so it formed belly dance? The cradle of belly dance is Egypt, and then it spread out to outlying areas. Is that correct?
I wouldn't say that. I would say that there are a lot of parallel local indigenous movement traditions that in specific zones evolved into their local, what we're calling belly dance traditions. But in Egypt, there's a long indigenous kind of movement, way of moving. And historically, you had professionals who were the best at that, who provided professional entertainment at social occasions like weddings, and still do. And so I don't think yes, there's cross-fertilization, like there's been a lot of cross-fertilization, for example, between the Levant and Egypt in their stylization, but Turkey is its own thing, Greece is its own thing. And so I'm cautious about this idea of spread.
Go ahead.
In Turkey, the Egyptians claim that the dance came from Turkey. Some other Egyptians claim the dance came from Egypt. The Turks claim that it was their dance, but Turkey occupied Greece for 400 years. So Greece has a variant that's closerly, that's a new word, is more closely related to Turkish. It's really quite a mess, and it's only gotten messier with YouTube and things influencing native dancers in other styles. Dancers picking up a Russian flavor, or picking up Turkish dancers picking up an Egyptian flavor, and then crossing in the music and everything. So as media has become more available, it has changed the dance in all of the countries.
So
dancers.
what do we know going back? Are there like ethnographers or dance experts that go back and say, well, belly dance emerged as a fertility dance? Did it emerge? Or because you see the Hollywood kind of thing of sheikhs having their belly dances come out to show how powerful they are. Well, how did the dance get it? Go ahead, Nisa.
Go ahead, Nisa.
You're having a
My
fit there.
anthropology major.
This is so, I apologize in advance for jumping up on a big soapbox right now because this is kind of my wheelhouse.
Dance, pop off.
Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a lot of mythology, and including within our industry, there's a lot of mythology about the dance history. And again, we run into this terminological issue. You really have to look at each region's history, but I can speak to the Egyptian history. There's no way we can tie anything to a fertility cult. There never was any such thing as a matriarchy in the history of the planet. I mean, all that anthropology training was good for something. And even trying to tie this back to like pharaonic times, like ancient Egypt, is a little bit of a stretch because there's a tendency even among Egyptians, because it's part of like post-Nasser nationalism in Egypt, to tie everything to the pharaonic era. But there's a tendency then to ignore everything that happened between the pharaonic era and like the late Ottoman era. And, we can trace back a long history of popular professional entertainers doing this kind of dancing back into medieval times. But it is literally that. It's popular entertainers at festivals, at weddings, and when people dance socially, it's for fun. I mean, it's literally the same way people do the electric slide in an American wedding. This is the dance that Egyptians do at their social occasions. And if you confront them with this idea, so you're demonstrating the movements of fertility, they're like, WTF, what are you talking about? Now, to be clear though, there is a tendency, especially among Western practitioners, to try to sanitize certain aspects of the dance, like some of the sexual innuendo, which is part of it, but not the only part of it. And that a lot of that rolls back to the dance is very prevalent in wedding settings. And that's in that sanctioned setting, the dancer can be a conveyance for a lot of wink, wink, nudge, nudge about the married couple. So is it
sort of like old vaudeville acts where they wouldn't be explicit about sexual stuff, but back 100 years ago, you sort of wink and nod?
Sometimes it's really explicit.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, look, here's an example. And this is where we get into the complexity within the culture, because at an elite level, these things are seen as very vulgar. And no, we don't do this in Egypt. But at the popular level, for example, at street weddings, for centuries, it's been a tradition that the professional dancer will sit on the lap of the bride and the groom and sometimes straddle one or both of them and make pelvic thrusts. And I mean, come on, we know what they mean. And I think there's a tendency in the West. Oh, belly dance, it's sensual, it's not sexual. Well, sometimes it is sexual, let's be honest. But that's because of that all, it can encompass many meanings in the culture of origin.
Go ahead.
The American separation of sensual and sexual as well. It's kind of our interpretive desire for things to be two different categories.
Yep.
We won't get
so
go to way too far.
Historically then, Sakura, did belly dance arise, say, post-Islam?
No. I mean, That's actually more of a Nisa question, I think.
What? I mean,
I brought you on.
you know, I mean, I'll be honest. Most of the practitioners, I mean, at least in Egypt, are Muslim,
Right?
and I think that I definitely there's a lot of parallels. Oh, it's so complicated to come up in a nutshell, but I mean, but definitely this is a dance that thrives. It thrives within the context of a Islamic dominated culture. So I don't think we can say, you know, Islam emerges out of the Arab world. So it kind of reflects back upon cultural aspects of the Arab world. So,
Yep.
you know, and a lot of the kind of love and hate relationship that people in Arab cultures have with belly dance is cultural and not really religious, because
Right.
I've
Yeah.
encountered plenty of Coptic Christian Egyptians who are as conflicted about the professional side of the dance as any Muslims.
So let me,
That's.
yeah, go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
It's kind of interesting to see the difference in secular Muslim countries versus Muslim dominated countries. I mean, you see in Egyptian dance, you see either a reserve or an over the topness, depending on how they're responding to being disapproved of by their own culture, the dancers. Whereas in Turkey, where it was more secular until recently, well, in modern times, it was more secular until recently, you saw more of a entertainment and money focus. You know, it's the strength of the religion within the culture, and the response of the culture changes the actual dance.
So let me ask all three of you, historically and in your own experience, how many male dancers are there currently sort of practicing that you know of, and what is the role of the male dancer in belly dance? Bridget, let you go first. Do you know any males?
To modern time, present day, there are a few male dancers. I can't name them because I'm terrible at remembering names. But they're kind of more of a minority in the group, but there are certain styles that we'll probably go into later that have more of a masculine sort of feel, just by region and style and a bunch of other stuff that Nisa will get into because she's their anthropology major. Love you, Nisa. Blessed.
It's pressure.
There are probably not as many as there were in history, but there are definitely some present day that do perform around on stage and travel about.
So Sakura, how about you? Are the male belly dancers, are they, since we're talking about thrusting, are they the belly dance equivalents of Chippendales, or do they serve some other purpose too?
Well, it sort of depends on what they're actually doing. If they're trying to work as a stage belly dancer, they have a completely different feel from if they're working as a folkloric performer or a semi-folkloric performer, stage folkloric performer. There's not a lot. Now, Nisa may totally disagree with me on this. I've found in my experience that there is not a lot of support for the male dancers in country of origin, although there's a lot of support for male dancers here in the U.S.
Why do you think that is? Is it looked at as, feminine to be dancing like that not masculine?
Yeah, I mean, there's just a whole lot of disapproval for men and women in the Middle East.
Yeah, because the reason I ask is, male ballet dancers are often thought of as homosexual. Only a gay guy would do that.
And yeah, that's basically the issue with the dancers, the male dancers actually in Egypt. Mm-hmm. In the United States, we care much less. Uh-huh. But some do break past that and manage to develop a following within their culture that that allows them quite a bit of freedom to a point. There's some really good belly dancers, male belly dancers in Egypt and in Turkey, but they have a much harder road.
So Nisa, what is your take on male belly dancers, and do they perform the same kind of moves as women? Obviously, they're built differently. Are the hips as free in men, or is it more upper body?
Oh yeah. The dancing is virtually identical, but here's the, so from the Egyptian standpoint, again, socially, it's unisex, and men, women, old, young, whatever. It's now up until probably the latter half of the 20th century, male professionals were commonplace. And for example, around the beginning of the 19th century, you had men who were called khawal, which today is a slur for a homosexual, a male homosexual, but in that time meant a male dancer. But those performers continued to be really commonplace up until right around the mid 20th century. Then Nasser happened. And, you know, but even before Nasser, there was a lot of kind of an absorption of Western values around masculinity in Egypt and other parts of the Arab world, kind of an adoption of the idea that, you know, masculinity looks like this, where in the past, while for sure homosexuality has been taboo, there was a lot more nuance in Islamic cultures in the past than after colonial times. And this is well documented. So the Khawalat were dressing, adopting female dress and mannerisms. And this was the case for male performers, even again into the mid 20th century. They would dress as women. They were recognized to be men, but they were kind of operated in their own gender landscape.
Let me just ask, Nisa, would this be sort of the belly dance equivalent of a castrato, you know, in terms of?
Kind of, yeah, in a way. And there were earlier traditions of this kind of entertainer in the Islamic world called mukhanathun, who were effeminates, quote unquote, but often operated as musical entertainers. And then colonialism, and there was this kind of adoption of this idea of Western masculinity. And when theatrical folk troupes became really, state-sanctioned theatrical folklore was elevated in Egypt in the late 50s and early 60s, the choreographers, the designers of that theatrical folklore really imposed this idea of a Western masculinity onto the male dancer. And so when you see male folklore performers, they don't move their hips. They're very erect in their posture and alignment. Now, many of those men teach female belly dancers and male belly dancers, but they don't perform it professionally. And the male belly dancers, who we could consider male professional belly dancers, there's, for example, a famous performer by the name of Tito from Egypt. Dancers like Tito have never had success in their culture. Tito performed for a time in a resort area called Sharm el-Sheikh, which is a resort area that is foreign dominated. And most of the male performers who have performed at all in Egypt in the modern era have performed in the resort areas, but never in cabarets. Now, there is an underground scene, but that is deep underground because of the taboos on homosexuality in current Islamic societies. So definitely male belly dancers thrive much more outside of the cultures of origin, except depending on which culture of origin you're talking about. Egypt, it doesn't thrive, but Lebanon has male professional performers. Turkey for sure has male professional performers. And I've had male students. I had a long-term male student from Lebanon. So it's definitely there, but definitely the career opportunities are very limited in a place like Egypt that has adopted that kind of colonized mentality about masculinity.
So I was just looking online here, and apparently, I want to talk about culture and how the dance came to North America. Apparently, in the late 19th century, in the World's Fair, that was the first time that belly dance became a cultural sort of phenomenon, and people were interested when they saw it at the World's Fair. But so let's talk a little bit about the American history and how it came to America. And since all three of you are, I presume, would be considered white females, is the idea of cultural appropriation, which is big now with a lot of people, is there a backlash against you for not being Arabic or Middle Eastern or any of you? Let me start with you, Bridget.
Well, I'm Korean, so I'm Asian, but for cultural appropriation, I think what a lot of, and again, this is with all cultural appropriation, not just dance, it's understanding the history and where your dance is coming from so you can truly appreciate it and know that, no, this right here is not a white girl dance. And knowing that this has a lot of really in-depth history and a lot of culture behind it that was brought to America and shown off. That it's not just, oh, shake your hips, then maybe shake your chest. There's a lot more to it than just those two things. For
Sakura, what is your take on the history of it coming to America as well as the modern calls of cultural appropriation?
Okay, coming to America, I actually tend to focus more on when it really, really bloomed in America, which was post-World War II. Okay. Although it was introduced at the World's Fair, it ended up it was already in vaudeville before then and was in vaudeville after. Post-World War II, it's a bunch of emigration. I'm just going to go, it's too long a topic for you. Okay. But let's see, and the other half of it was
cultural appropriation.
Cultural appropriation. Holy cow! Yeah, cultural appropriation is justifiably, a big issue for us. Really, it stresses the importance of labeling and knowing what you're really doing. Truth in advertising, always, and trying to at least qualify what belly dance actually means when you advertise, when you put out information, when you do anything within the field. And it is, since it is not of our culture, it makes complete sense. It's just a battle cry at the moment and has made things a little bit harder to navigate. But once again, I agree that we need to navigate it as sensitively as possible.
Nisa, have you ever been called a cultural appropriator or anything?
I think that anybody who comes from what we would consider a culture that dominates other cultures, because there's a long and sordid history
colonialization,
of European powers and the United States more recently occupying, exploiting, etc. cultures over there. And so I think it's a line all of us need to tread very, very carefully. I don't think that they're, like, in my personal experience, I've not experienced anybody from Egypt or elsewhere in the Middle East or North Africa who's been like, you need to stop doing this. And, but
Yeah.
it's, but there's definitely sometimes the side eye when you come out, and and that's why I feel like education is so important. One time I had been hired to teach a taster class for a group of women, and there was one Arab woman in the group, and I knew she was rightfully like, oh no, what is this white lady gonna say about this? And I started giving, like, usually when I do taster classes, I introduce, this is a gender neutral dance, it's done in celebratory context, blah, 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 all the little nutshell history. And I could see her expression melt. And then she was able to relax and enjoy the class, because I didn't get up in front and spew Aladdin and Alibaba bullshit. I mean,
right?
And let's be honest, there are a lot of dance teachers in this industry that make their money on the fantasy. Yeah. And whether it be the Aladdin and Alibaba fantasy, or whether it be the primitive matriarchy, let's all get in the red tent together, you know, and that isn't what it is.
Or make your husband a sultan.
No.
I want to touch upon a few other things before we end this here. When you think of dancers, someone like Martha Graham comes to mind here in this country. Is there a Martha Graham currently, you know, type figure in belly dance, or was there someone like, you know, we think of opera, Enrico Caruso, someone who's the titan in that particular field? Is there anyone historically who's that big a name, and who's like the leading figure in the dance now, Sakura?
Ooh, I want to hear Nisa's first.
Okay.
I mean, I got a list, like a ticker coming out, because it's so hard to one. I mean, because again, like, it's so important, like the stylistic idiosyncrasy is so important, and there have been so many influential, famous people, but I will say, just in terms of international significance, probably one of the most significant figures in the Egyptian industry is a woman named Raia Hassan. Because Raia, what's been interesting about her is she never worked as a belly dancer, but she's been the most influential on this industry in the last 25 years, because she basically started as a folk troupe performer and realized there was money to be made in the belly dance industry. So she set herself up as a trainer and choreographer to the stars. And she has been basically the star maker of Cairo for decades now. And also, she saw the market with foreigners, and she started the idea of, she popularized, she didn't start it, the idea of an international belly dance festival. And, you know, with star instructors and people flying into Cairo from all over the world to take these classes. And she's the modern day analog of a woman named Badia Masabni,
yeah.
who also didn't invent the things that she did, but was so good at business. Like, you know, just really powerhouses at business. And in that way have really shaped the landscape in their wake for decades.
So Sakura, is there a particular figure that you can point to that was a particular innovator, that like who had the most impact, who you know has a certain move that's a, oh, that was her move, I'm just doing a version of it, that kind of thing?
There's actually a ton of people that have signature moves that have permeated the dance form, especially the Egyptian, through the Egyptian leg of it. I tend to, I didn't know whether to answer this because I think of the historic people too, because there's a big long chain of flash in the pan kind of styles. I think of like Dana for example. And there's a bunch of flash in the pan from countries of origin. There's also a bunch of flash in the pan in the United States that you could point at them and the schools that they have created and the styles that they have created, but they haven't created anything. They've created good business opportunities in most cases. And so that was like, oh God, what are you asking? I could name names, but I would prefer not to.
Okay. Bridget, is there any particular person whose style or moves that you've tried to, is there a hero or heroine in the dance for you?
Mostly I try and model my dance after my mentors and my teachers that have influenced me, but I think for overall in the community's sake, I think it would be a shame to not bring up Fifi Abdul, because she is one of the iconic, or she's one of the most iconic dancers
Fifi, Samia.
In our modern history that brought belly dance to, she brought it to a new style that was more kind of, I guess, more laid back than what was out there. She brought it to cinema. She did so much for our just dance history and what we see, because she was in movies. So when you would go to see, Arabic cinema, you'd see Fifi Abdul.
And then Mahmoud Reda as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me, the next question I want to ask, let me start with you, Bridget. Is there a current person who is sort of doing something that hasn't been done in the art form before? We have painters, we had expressionism, impressionism, and all art forms get something that becomes hot, and for 20 or 30 years it dominates. Bridget, since you're the youngest, is there someone now that you see as dynamic and they're going to change it in the art form for 20 years?
Well, it depends. If you want to think of what, I don't want to step on anybody's toes. I don't want to be mean, but there is, I'm going to say it because, we're all traditional dancers here, so I can say it. God, the tribal, people who say that they're tribal dancers and trying to say, oh, I'm a tribal belly dancer. Hun, no. Which I will say, I'll call myself out. I kind of was when I first started. Oh boy. As I was a baby dancer, I did a lot of things that I would frown upon as my older self, but I will say a lot of the tribal fusion, even though I don't consider it belly dance because it doesn't take account for, the cultural side, the musicality side, historical side, has really started shaping the belly dance scene in the United States. I don't know about how much in the rest of the world, but definitely the tribal belly dancers, or what's the other one? What's the other one, Sakura? The other one that's starting to make a new kind of approach in the scene.
Just fusion is all I can think of.
Fusion, there we go.
Okay.
Fusion started to really make a huge resurgence into the community, but I don't know if we want to consider that part of the changing belly dance, even though it is changing belly dance, but
yeah. So
Sakura, is fusion sort of like jazz fusion is in music, that kind of thing, where you're taking things from other dances and bringing them in?
Yeah, it's combining more than one dance form, oftentimes hip hop and belly dance movement. I've kind of lightened up over the years, as long as it is labeled correctly. I used to really have a thing about it. As long as it's labeled correctly, I am much better with it than I used to be. And yeah, what? You're thinking something. Oh no, him. I was looking at.
That's the problem, though. People don't. They say, "Oh,
I know they don't.
Like, that's not a thing."
I know they don't, and I think it's probably it's disrespectful to the cultures if you're not really careful about labeling.
Mhm.
At a certain point, it becomes some kind of American invention, like American tribal style, which
And it just stops being rock sharky or belly dance at some point when you get so far down the line of fusion. Where's the belly dance?
Mm.
Where
yeah, well,
cultural movement?
but I mean, dancers coming in on a cherry picker or on, with weird props has always been a part of entertainment, stage entertainment. So, I mean, that
It's a
part's
really weird
lost.
area. It's such a weird area.
Yeah.
It's now, it hasn't solidified. It's still growing and it's still trying to find its place depending on what part of the country you're in. Because different parts of the country have different styles, and some people are more ahead, some people are more behind, because that's just how information travels.
Right.
So even the internet, some people are still, they're doing trends that were 10 years ago and they're saying, oh, this is a new thing. I'm like, maybe,
But
yeah, that's just how information moves.
So Heather, how about you? What is something new in the art form that you think is good or maybe not?
I think, there's a lot happening in Egypt right now. And I think sometimes the dance industry outside of Egypt is kind of not really clued into the on the ground reality there. And gets their, let's be honest, their collective panties in a bunch about trends in the Egyptian scene, because they seem to be going away from correct belly dance as
from
we come
1930.
to, yeah, exactly. And the thing is that belly dance in the culture of origin has always been evolving. It's always been hybridizing inside the culture. That's where I kind of differentiate between the American tribal movement and all that. That's sort of detached from source cultures, there's a kind of white saviorism that exists in the Western world about, they don't respect their dancers and we need to preserve and innovate. And well, they're doing all that. And so, one of the definitely the recent trends in the Cairo nightclub scene is there's a genre of music that emerged after the 2011 revolution called mahraganat, which just means festival music. But it's like, it's based in traditional musical modalities, but it fuses in hip hop sensibilities and electronica. There's a lot of auto-tune. There's Egyptian rap now, and the Egyptian public loves this music. And so dancers have to dance to what's popular. And so increasingly in nightclub settings, you see dancers engaging with this new popular music and incorporating some of the street dance movement and hybridizing that in. And a lot of folks outside of that industry get really like, that's not traditional. And I mean, well, somebody get the memo to all those Egyptians who are loving it, because, they wouldn't consume it if they didn't enjoy it. So I think we have to grapple with that there is evolution within the culture, and we've got to allow that evolution to exist and learn about it and engage with it.
I want to put a final question to each of you, and then let you speak. I know, Bridget, you work at your mom's tea shop or whatnot. Is your goal eventually to be a full-time belly dancer, and anything else you want to say that I may have missed?
Well, I mean, just in dance in general, it can be difficult to break into becoming part of the mainstream of dance. Well, there are people that do dance professionally as their career, which I know very well, for me personally, once it becomes a full-time job, it stops being as fun as it could be just by doing it as something I personally just enjoy doing. While yes, I love performing out on stage, I love performing out in front of crowds. I honestly really just love to dance. And if I had to have it as a paycheck to paycheck sort of thing, I think it would lose the fun out of it. It really would.
Okay. Sakura, your website is sakura.net, and I'll link to that, and I'll link to Bridget's Facebook page, which is Bridget Genevieve. Are you able to make a full living there, or is it an avocation, not a vocation for you?
No, I did it for years and years and years. I had dance studio. I had educational videos that turned into DVDs eventually with the technology. I have a band. We put out recordings. You have to scrape every little corner to survive in the arts, though. Yeah. And yeah, if I had it all to do over again, I wouldn't. But I did. So okay. There. And I teach and perform internationally still.
And Nisa, your website that I'll link to is bellydancewithnisa.com. And is it full-time for you? And is there anything that I missed as well?
It is full-time for me. God help me. Yeah, what Sakura said is no lie. Like, you're eking out a living. But, you know, I worked full-time for a long time while running my studio, and I think it was 2017 that I left to do this full-time, and I don't regret it. I make way less money, but I love being able to focus on this and throw all my energy into it. And my big focus is the educational focus, and I'm working on book number 2 on the history. Oh. So, yeah, so we're trying to chip away at all those mythologies a little bit at a time.
I love people like her.
Yeah. Well, I thank all of you for your time. Of the 350 plus shows that I've done in this series of interviews, this is probably the subject that I knew the absolute least about. So I'm informed, and it's interesting. And as I said, anyone who watches this, I'll link to each of their web pages and/or websites, so you can follow up with them if you're interested in finding out more. So thank you very much for an interesting discussion.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you for having us.